Welcome to the City. I'm Anthony Wilson, the Public Information Officer for the City of San Angelo. And we have a special episode of the City today, a little different format. Instead of my posing questions to our guest today, we're going to engage more in a conversation because we're talking with my peer, the Public Information Officer over at the San Angelo Police Department, Officer Tracy Gonzalez. Tracy, thanks for being with us.
Thank you for having me today.
First of all, tell us a little bit about your background in law enforcement and how it came to be that you became the PIO for the SATV.
Well, I've been with the department for about 7 years now, and I've been the Assistant Public Information Officer for a couple of years, but here just within the past, I would say 6 months, I took over as lead PIO.
Mm-hmm. And in your previous life, before you became the Assistant PIO, what was your role with the police department?
After doing patrol, I did background investigations and assisted the Community Services Division with different aspects of community services, crime prevention, background investigation.
And as your role as Public Information Officer, it's a little bit different than my role as Public Information Officer for the city because you have some other law enforcement associated duties besides just releasing information to the public.
That's correct.
Tell us about those.
Well, part of what we do with public information from a law enforcement perspective is it can be very challenging. We have to balance integrity of investigations with the public's right to have access to public information. So we have to make that balance. We want to make sure we're providing good information to the public, but without compromising an investigation that might be ongoing.
Mm-hmm. And of course your background is totally different than mine. I came from more of a media background. I spent 20 years as a newspaper reporter and editor, primarily in Abilene, and then I was promoted to within that newspaper company to be the managing editor of the San Angelo Standard-Times, and spent a couple of years doing that before I hired on with the city as the civic events manager, which is the person who manages our Coliseum, our convention center, and some other municipally owned facilities. And I served in that role for about 5 years. And I felt like that really helped me because I knew not only had the media background, but I knew about our organization, how it worked, the relationships within the departments. I already had a rapport with many of my colleagues. And so I felt like when I took over as Public Information Officer in September, that helped me a lot to hit the ground running. And I assume it must be the same with you as an officer within the SAPD, that, you know, if I had come in as the Public Information Officer within the SAPD, I would have had a steep learning curve in learning about the department and developing a relationship with the officers. How much did that help you, having already been an officer within the SAPD?
I think it was a great help. I think that when you're out there just dealing with the public every day and just learning how to communicate and just balancing different things and realizing that the importance of communication for your job is essential with police work and public information. And before I got into that, when I was young, I was in the medical field, so I had a lot of experience in dealing with just communicating with people.
Mm-hmm. So why do you think, in your mind, why are public information efforts important, from a police perspective particularly?
From a police perspective, I think it's very important that the public, the community that we serve, knows what we're doing. They have a right to know, but I think also they need to understand that as officers, we are also part of the community as people, as mothers, fathers. You know, our kids go to school here. We have to have a good communication with the people that we serve so that they understand what's required of us in our daily duties. I think that's essential. And for the progression of government and making the decisions, do we add more officers? You know, are we staffing the city effectively to protect them? They have to know what's happening on a day-to-day basis so that they can in turn make those decisions.
And from a police perspective, do you think it's important for people obviously to know about the crime situations within our community so that they can take the steps necessary to protect themselves, their homes, and their families?
Absolutely. And I really want the public to know that they can call us. I think that that's a huge misconception that most people have in the community, is that they feel like if they're calling the police to ask questions, they're bothering us because we're already having to deal with calls if something is going on. And really it's the opposite. People are welcome to call community services if they have a question about crime prevention, drug issues, certain things that might be going on in their neighborhood that they want addressed, they need to contact us and get that conversation started so that we can help them.
From a city perspective, I think we take a lot of the same sort of angle in regards to public information, in that I always feel like our job is to let the citizens know what's happening within their municipal government that is of importance and impact to them. So some things, may be of interest, some things may be of importance, and some things may be of impact. And I think the more that citizens understand about what's happening within their municipal government, and not only what's happening, but more importantly, how it's happening and why it's happening, I think that builds a level of trust and support for our municipal government that frankly we need. We need the citizens' support, and I think the more that they understand us, the more that they know what we're doing and why we're doing it, the more support that we're going to give us. And that makes, I think, everybody's lives easier, including, frankly, our own.
I agree.
Yeah. So when you're working in public information in the PD and you're thinking about, information to release, how do you have to weigh that against, things that you may not be able to release because it's part of an investigation, or you're careful not to compromise an investigation?
Well, it's actually very time consuming. When you have a request for public information, and really that can be from a member of the media, or it can be from a citizen who might have been a party to an incident report. If they request a copy of the incident report, it's not as simple as it just being distributed. You have to weigh the content of the report to make sure that if we do release information, it will not compromise an ongoing investigation. So it's really tough. We want to be fair, and we want to give out information that we are required to by law, but also we have to balance that with our obligation to a victim of a crime and protecting the integrity of that information, because it might have a serious outcome in the prosecution. So it's a balancing act.
So a lot of times, almost every day, you're issuing some sort of press release. What's the genesis of that? Does that typically come from the officers who initially respond to the call? Does it come from the detectives? Does someone within the command staff say, this is something that we need to issue a press release about? Is that something that you hear about and say, hey, why don't we release some information about that? Talk a little bit about how that process works.
Well, like you said, every day it's a different thing going on, and it can come from any one of those aspects. If I review the end of shift report and see something that I believe might be interesting to the public and really good for them to know so that they are aware of maybe something that happened in their neighborhood, I will approach the command staff and my lieutenant and just let them know, I think this is really good to put out. This is important that we communicate this incident. Sometimes we're asked, sometimes something might have happened that we're not privy to, but command staff feels that, this is really something we want to address with the public. It might come from that direction. So it's different every day.
So in a lot of ways, do you almost have like a reporter hat on and your eyes and ears are open all the time for things that you think need to be released or should be released?
Absolutely. I think that part of my job as an officer doing public information is to separate that from myself at times and think about it as just Tracy Gonzalez, person that lives in the community, and how I could use that information to help keep my family safe, inform my neighbors of what's going on. So I think it's really important to separate the officer aspect a little bit and just become Tracy the person and recognize that information might be beneficial to others. And as far as like constructing the actual press release and going back to what you said earlier, it is challenging because if you think about police incidents, there's going to be more than one officer usually. So you're having to read through all of those reports, take a little bit of the perspective from each officer and what they saw and what their role is out at the scene. And then you have to visit with the detective and see what their outcome is and how that might be very different from what those initial officers first saw. It's a whole picture that's going on, and you have many eyes on it, so you're really having to look at all of the views to formulate that press release.
Well, I've told you this before. I mean, I think for someone who has never worked in the media, I think your instincts are really good as far as what's of interest to people in the community. And it works the same way within our office. A lot of times people from the organization will come to us and say, hey, can you help us release some information about whatever the case might be? And then we work with them often on not just a press release, but on a media plan. Okay, let's see if we can arrange maybe a contributed piece to the newspaper, or let's see if we can do a spot on SATV or an interview on KLST, whatever the case might be, in order to use all those different mediums that we have at our disposal and in order to release that information to the widest possible audience. And sometimes those ideas come from us because frankly it doesn't always occur to someone working within our operations department or our airport or our finance department that, you know, this could really be of interest to the community, and it would be a benefit to the organization to make sure that the community does hear about these things. And I think that's a little bit where my media training sort of comes in handy. I recognize what is a story and what isn't a story, and you know, I've always been impressed with your instincts in that regard, because you would have made a very good reporter if you'd
I appreciate that. And I do want to say that I have seen that shift in the city's public information. And when you deal with the different divisions, you know, let's say street and bridge, you know, they're so used to doing what they do every day, and they might not see it as newsworthy, but you're coming into it with that media perspective, and you recognize how that might be fascinating and important for the public to know certain aspects of what's going on into, you know, capital improvements. So you do have a very good way of showing interest and, you know, things that might be interesting to people in something as asphalt that might not be, you know, particularly interesting to the people that are doing it.
We will be back in just a moment to talk more about public information efforts between the city and the San Angelo Police Department. But first, we're going to spotlight another outstanding city employee, GIS analyst Morgan Kuhn.
I'm Morgan Kuhn. I'm the GIS Stormwater Analyst, and I've been here for almost 18 months. GIS is Geographic Information Systems, and we make all the maps for the city, along with some data management and storage. So we take a lot of data that doesn't make sense to most people, and we turn it into a visual map so we can share it with everybody. A lot of the maps we do are for parks. We do a lot of maps for planning. Recently we did an elections map, so that they can put it online and post that all the elections, polling locations and stuff like that. We can also do some analyzing with like water usage and things like that, but mostly what the public is going to see are parks, zoning, elections. We actually draw in a lot of our stuff from hand. Mike Smith, our GIS manager, started our maps from the bottom up. So everything you see on our online viewer, from the streets to the ownership parcels, and all that's been built up over the years. So it's very customized just for our city. It's kind of artistic and mathematic at the same way. So we have a lot of tools in our programming that helps us make straight lines or have them at a certain angle. We use a lot of the tools in our programming to make sure that everything is where it needs to be. And we can also use GPS locations, XY coordinates, and stuff like that to really make sure they're nice and clean. I'm the stormwater analyst, and it's really just part-time stormwater. So 4 hours a day I work on stormwater data, and that's stormwater permits that come in. TCEQ regulates those, and so they need to be on a map for the stormwater crew so they can see who's been permitted and who hasn't, if it's an active site or an inactive site. And I also do, when we get the CO list for commercial buildings at the end of the month, I go in and make sure every commercial building that is open has a stormwater bill, and we do that by calculating impervious area using either aerials or a building site plan. So that's a lot of what I do for stormwater. I have a geography background with a minor in geology, so that helps a little bit with the stormwater. But you can have, I mean, it really just kind of depends on what you're good at, and if you've taken certain courses and you're really good with the software, it doesn't matter a whole lot what your major background was. But if you're really good with the computer, you can catch on with the software and you understand the importance of geography and kind of like spatial analysis. That's really what is most important. We get calls a lot of times about the online viewer, which I'm sure y'all know about, and if you haven't, you should look at it. But since our addresses are on there and our ownership parcels, and we've got a lot of stuff on there just for homeowners and builders, we do get a lot of calls about, is this address right? You know, my address is this, but it doesn't look like you have it on the map. So we help them with that and direct them towards Maxine, who's our address coordinator, if there's an error or an issue. We also have the public call if they want a map, if they would just want a printed out city map. We do those too, and a few custom things, but mostly we answer questions about the online viewer. Very fast. We upgraded our software, I think last May, and within I would say 5 or 6 months of updating our software, there was already a new version out. So we're constantly looking at updating and adding extensions and making sure all of our packages are imported correctly and it's ready to go. We spend a lot of time on just making sure everything's exactly the way it needs to be. We're really particular because we have to be. Because on the online viewer, we've got our ownership parcels and our streets, and that stuff's really, really important. And it also all ties into our 911 management, which is another position. So we do everything from just making sure everything's drawn in correctly and the parks are colored the right way, to making sure all our addresses are 911 addressed, so that the police and fire have that in their cars or in their vehicles when they're on their way to an accident or report or something like that. My spare time right now, we're getting the nursery together and getting the house ready for the baby. We also have 2 dogs that we spend a lot of time with at home, and I'm taking courses online through Penn State to get my GIS certificate, which is kind of optional for GIS employees. I love map production, so I like making maps for parks. We've had a lot of fun doing some of those lately. I just really like being able to display the data for people to understand better, because I'm visual too, so I completely understand being able to see something and have it colored and coordinated versus just like a, text file.
Welcome back to the city. We are continuing our conversation with Tracy Gonzalez. She is the Public Information Officer for the San Angelo Police Department. One of the things I wanted to ask you about, of course, again, you're coming from a law enforcement perspective, myself more from a media background, but how do you approach working with our mass media here within the community, our television stations, radio stations, and the Standard Times?
Well, I think that for law enforcement, it's traditionally been a little bit challenging, and I think in the past we've seen it as just by nature and training a little bit adversarial, in that they're wanting to know everything that's going on and they can be aggressive, and I really look at that differently. I think that the media has a job to do, and they want to communicate what's happening to the public, and I would rather them give the correct information than draw to conclusions. So I really view the mass media as a partner. They partner with me every day to get a message out to the public.
And I totally agree with you. I have to say, I think we have lots of friends, both in the SAPD and the city, within our mass media here. And frankly, they come to us for information, and sometimes some of our employees feel a little burdened by that. But they do much more for us in helping us disseminate information than frankly we do for them, because there hasn't been an instance where, for instance, I haven't approached one of them and said, could we, in whatever the request is, and they have unfailingly been able to help us spread information, important information to the community. And that adversarial relationship just doesn't work. It doesn't serve anybody well, including the city or the SAPD. And so I'm in total agreement. And the thing I think that we have to understand is, even though there's this brave new world of social media, the mass media is still the most effective way to communicate with the public. And frankly, I was a little surprised when I worked in the Parks Department as the Civic Events Manager. We were doing a survey on how people wanted to receive their information about what was going on in Parks and Recreation. And still, the first 2 options that people wanted was not Facebook and Twitter necessarily, it was the Standard Times and KLST. And so I think that speaks to the fact that people still like and want to receive their information through the mass media. But we also now have at our disposal, and I think this is a great tool, and I know you're very passionate about it, social media. Talk a little bit about why you think social media is an important medium for us to be using in order to communicate with the public.
I think that social media for us as an agency and law enforcement agencies across the country has been such a great introduction to communication outside of traditional media, because it allows us to communicate more of the message of what the department does as a whole to the population than simply relying on traditional media. And to touch on that, I don't want to do away with traditional media. They're very necessary to what we do every day in communication. I think that we have to provide something for everybody. And there is a conversation taking place on social media, and we have an obligation to communicate our message as an agency, so why not reach out to all the platforms? And what I like about social media is it's a little more personal. We're able to have that two-way communication with the public, which I think is great, because if we do construct a press release and we put it out to traditional media, the masses receive the message, but they can't comment or they can't ask further questions that maybe they felt wasn't covered in that news spotlight. So for me, it's great to allow the public to respond and ask questions. I think that builds a bond. I think that they start to see us as law enforcement, as people, instead of just people in a uniform. You know, conversation is so important.
And I agree with you. One of the things that I like about social media is the fact that, and again, this is coming from someone who worked a lot of years in the media, is that it's unfiltered. We get to share the story the way that we feel is most appropriate, all of the information. And the mass media has a job to do, and their job is to filter that, to pick out the most important nuggets to share with their readership or their viewership. And it's simple physics. You know, what we feel like might be a 20-inch story in the newspaper will not fit into a 12-inch hole in the newspaper. Mm-hmm. Or what we feel like is a 3-minute video story doesn't necessarily fit into a 90-second spot on one of our television stations. So it allows us to communicate all of the message that we think is important for the media to know, or excuse me, for the public to know, and then they can sift through it and decide what's important and what's not. And I also love the immediacy of it. You know, you and I issue a press release and it might appear in the newspaper 2 or 3 or 4 days later. You know, we issue something on Facebook or Twitter right now and boom, it's out there.
It's instant.
Yeah,
mm-hmm.
Yeah. Do you get a lot of people commenting on your Facebook pages or responding to your tweets?
Yes, and for me, it's really fun to watch that, because you know you have to wonder sometimes, who's reading this. You know, is anybody looking at this in Angelo Police Department Facebook or Twitter? And when you have that instant response with very valid questions, it kind of fuels me to do a better job, because I see that people are reading this. People do care. This is their community. They're just as passionate about what's going on as I am. So for me, it's wonderful. The challenge with social media is that it isn't an 8 to 4 position. And that's something that in public information, whether it's law enforcement or civilian, you have to see that most people that are receiving this information, they might not be able to respond until after 4 o'clock. So, you know, you want to accommodate people, and you don't want to wait until the next business day to communicate, because you want them to know that we're listening to what they have to say. So it is a daily thing. I want to know from you, Anthony, what do you prefer in social media? Do you like Facebook or Twitter?
Well, you know,
what's the difference? Because I've always wanted to ask you that.
Well, you know, that's an interesting question, and I have always said that I think San Angelo, frankly, is a Facebook town. And I don't know why that is, but it seems like we have more interactions with our citizens via Facebook than we do Twitter. Now, the interesting thing about Twitter is, as I followed it as the civic events manager, and of course, we should say that I think San Angelo was among the first cities in Texas on that first wave of social media, because you and I attended back a few years ago.
It's been a while.
Yeah, a training session in Austin to learn how to do this well. And it was being led by some city officials from Round Rock. And I think, you know, both the city's Facebook page and the police department's Facebook page has a lot more followers now than Round Rock's page did. And I think it shows our commitment to it. But But we have incorporated Twitter, and what I have noticed is that Twitter seems to be something that younger people seem to gravitate towards more than maybe your average citizen. Again, I'm not sure why that is. Maybe it's the immediacy of it. Maybe it's because it's easier for the kids to access on their phones or whatever. But it seems like a lot of Angelo State University students,
exactly.
a lot of teenagers, and a lot of young people really seem to prefer Twitter, while people who are, I guess, older and maybe more established in the community and in their careers prefer Facebook. Is that your impression?
That is my impression. I know personally I prefer Facebook because I'm a very visual person. So I like the interaction with pictures and seeing other people commenting to a thread. So for me, visually, I prefer Facebook. But I do see that some of our younger population, especially with the university, they love Twitter. And from a law enforcement standpoint, I see that it's different throughout the country as well as Canada. I have a lot of law enforcement friends in Toronto that their police departments use Twitter, and it's a lot more popular than Facebook. A lot of their officers will tweet from the beat, so to speak. And for me, that's really fascinating to see how different parts of the world prefer certain mediums of social media.
One of the things I wanted to mention, because I'm really proud about this, I was doing some award nominations for the State Municipal Information Officers annual contest. And I went and looked, and interestingly enough, San Angelo's Facebook page, and it would be the same with the police department, because y'all have a very sizable following. We have a bigger following than Houston. Houston is the only metropolitan area in which we don't have a bigger following than. We have a bigger following than Austin, Dallas, Fort Worth, El Paso. I mean, cities that are much, much larger than us. So, again, I think it sort of speaks to the fact that San Angeloans do love Facebook. Now, one of the tools that you use that we do not use is Nixle. I want you to talk just a little bit about what Nixle is and why you think that's an important communication tool for you.
I think that Nixle, first of all, what Nixle is it's an incredible emergency alerting platform that is offered to not only law enforcement but municipal agencies throughout the country. It's a free service. So I think that it's good for the public. There's no subscription fee. It's free to them, and it's also free to the cities to use a service. It's a communication tool, and what we can do with Nixle is send out public safety alerts through either email or text message. I think that it should be made known that it is not a form of social media. It's not intended as a Facebook or Twitter account. It is not social media. It is to communicate public safety messages. What I like about it is that I can feed those alerts to our social media so that we can reach as many people as possible. What I want the public to understand about the importance of receiving Nixle alerts is that it's from an authenticated system. It cannot be hacked like Facebook and Twitter. And I think that here recently we've seen some hacking going on with the Associated Press here recently. Their Twitter account was hacked, and some very damaging information was released about the president being injured in some bombs that went off in the White House. This just happened here recently. And what we saw was an immediate effect in the stock market, and how that instant access to information goes viral. So in those tweets that were coming out, it really affected the economy. It affected a lot of things going on. And what I want the public to know is if there's a critical message that we're going to issue as a law enforcement agency, it will come from Nixle. Now, they might see that alert on Facebook or Twitter, but at least they know that if it's coming from a Nixle account, it has not been hacked. So there is a balance. We want to use social media to communicate effectively with the public in times of crisis communication, but for us as an agency, we're going to use the Nixle platform if it's a true public safety crisis.
And one of the tools that we use in addition to Facebook and Twitter is obviously our YouTube account, and that is managed very effectively and efficiently by our multimedia coordinator, Brian Groves. He does a tremendous job. He does
a great job
with that. And so we want to encourage people to check us out on Facebook, check us out on Twitter, of course our YouTube following here on SATV, and our new website domain, which is COSATX.us. So if people want more information about public information with the SAPD, what's the best way that they can go about getting that?
Whatever works for them. If they want to send us a Facebook message, I would be happy to communicate that way. If they want to give me a call at 481-2718, I would be happy to answer anybody's question and really partner with them.
We've been talking with Tracy Gonzalez. She is the Public Information Officer for the San Angelo Police Department, and we hope you'll join us for the next episode of The City.